So why is the tariff pause on electronic devices only temporary? Here to assess is E.J. Antoni, Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, and Dave Hebert, economist at the American Institute for Economic Research. E.J. Antoni, David Herbert, great to have you both with us.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
So Secretary Howard Lutnick, Commerce Secretary, commenting on the Trump administration's decision on Friday, this to exempt electronic devices like smartphones, iPhones, laptops from tariffs, that this was only going to be a temporary reprieve. I want to play a clip and get your reaction.
Semiconductors and pharmaceuticals will have a tariff model in order to encourage them to reshore, to be built in America. We need our medicines and we need semiconductors and our electronics to be built in America.
EJ, I want to get your thoughts. What do you make of this decision, and why do you think electronic devices like iPhones were exempted?
It's a great question. You know, I agree with the fundamental principle here that one of the lessons from 2020 was we can no longer be reliant on the Chinese Communist Party for critical materials and for critical supplies. And we need to either have that stuff made here or made close by with one of our closest friends and allies. Again, we can't rely on hostile bad actors. We shouldn't be relying on Iran, for example, for oil. So the basic principle is sound. I think the issue here is that the messaging on tariffs seems to be all over the place. If you listen to the Commerce Secretary, if you look at Trade Representative Greer, or if you look at the Trade Advisor Peter Navarro, these men keep contradicting each other, unfortunately. Sometimes they're contradicting themselves. So I think it's probably best if we take our cues either directly from the president when it comes to trade or the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. Those two seem to have been the most consistent and have the most level heads when it comes to trade. And frankly, when it comes to not only what the current policy is today, but what we can look for in terms of future policy, which is critical so that we can plan.
Dave, you're welcome to weigh in. And also, if you could just talk about how long you think it will realistically take to bring manufacturing back to the United States.
So the critical component here is not about components in manufacturing. It's not about raw materials. It's more about the infrastructure. And this nation just is not set up to move millions and millions of pounds of parts and materials around the country with ease. And so that is one of the big things that's going to have to be implemented and put into place before we could even begin to see manufacturing at a scale that can compete with these other countries. Now, complicating this, like EJ was saying, is the mixed messaging coming out of literally everyone in the White House associated with these tariffs. Donald Trump says that this is going to create jobs. History says otherwise, but Lutnick himself said that the jobs we're going to bring back from China are all going to be automated. And so that seems a bit strange, and that the only jobs we're going to create in this industry would be in HVAC and machine repairing. Now, that doesn't sound like the type of jobs that we've been promised. It doesn't sound like the type of jobs that Americans are pining for. And so it's just really difficult to see what the purpose of these tariff policies is. As for how long it'll take to get to a point where we're making semiconductors and everything else ourselves, I mean, it could be years. It's certainly not going to be 90 days. It's certainly not going to be even during Trump's term.
Now, EJ, National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett saying that more than 10 countries have made what they're calling amazing trade deal offers to the United States, this following President Trump's new tariffs. What's your take on this? Do you think that global trade, if you will, is adapting to stay on good terms with the United States?
I think so. And I'm also, Steve, I have to laugh at some of these headlines. For example, when I see the EU is worried that all of these Chinese products, which used to get shipped here to the United States, might now get dumped into the European market. And so the EU are very worried that now their producers will face competition from China. I'm sorry, but if it's so good for the United States, why isn't it good for the European Union? So I am glad to see that these nations, or in the case of the EU, these groups of nations, are coming to the table and they're looking to make trade deals. I think that's a very, very positive sign. And look, ultimately what we want here is not less free trade, but more free trade. We want to reduce barriers. The whole point of the reciprocal tariffs was to force other nations to reduce their tariff and non-tariff barriers so that we can have American exporters on a level playing field with the rest of the world. So that's all, I think, a very positive step in the right direction. The other thing I want to highlight here is I think it's actually more important for the United States to secure good trade deals with China's main trading partners, not even necessarily ours to start with, because what we need to do is isolate the Chinese Communist Party from those other nations. We can start peeling those countries out of China's sphere of influence and put them back into our own. Again, the key here is isolating the CCP, not allowing them to spread influence. We want to get Russia on our side, for example, not China's. We want to get Iran out of these agreements with China, and not just those nations, but nations like Korea, Japan, Australia. We would much rather have those strong ties with those nations coming here to the United States than China.
Dave, to EJ's point there, we did see that just almost how easy it was with just a little bit of leverage with, say, Panama, all of a sudden changing their tune to not wanting to associate with China as much. Which countries do you think are on the table here, and who do you think depends most on the United States and is most likely to come to the negotiating table?
Well, I think you hit it right on the head right there with that last sentence. The way that tariffs work and where they can work, and I want to emphasize the word can there, is on countries that have heavy reliance on the U.S. for their international trade, combined with a low GDP, at least relative to ours. So if you look at, for example, Colombia, that's a $1 trillion a year economy, and about 26% of their imports and exports are with the United States. Look at Canada. They're about a $2.2 or so trillion economy, and about 80% of their international trade is with the U.S. Mexico, roughly the same. China, however, is only about 7% reliant on the U.S. for their imports. So in other words, of all the things coming into China from other countries, the U.S. only makes up about 7%. Conversely, we depend on China for about 14% of our imports. And so in terms of which countries are most likely to give in to U.S. demands, it's the ones that are going to be very reliant. Now, I have to push back on something that EJ brought up about how these are negotiating tactics. I don't think that's true, because if it were, we would have jumped at the opportunity for the EU's to match the EU's 0-for-0 tariffs. Instead, Donald Trump famously demanded that they additionally buy about $340 billion worth of our energy products. So this isn't about reciprocity. This isn't about getting to zero trade barriers. This isn't about lowering trade barriers. This is about being capricious and thinking about who has potentially, in Donald Trump's eyes, ripped off the American people for generations.
Now, Kevin Hassett also said the United States would 100% not face a recession this year. Crystal ball question that everybody loves. EJ, based on what you're seeing in the markets, what do you make of it?
Well, I'm certainly not going to say there's 100% chance there. I mean, there's certainly always a chance. And frankly, at the end of 2024, there were a lot of recession indicators that had turned positive. In other words, these are metrics that we tend to look at to see, are we moving to a recession or not? And a lot of them were flashing the sign that says, yes, we probably are. So, the inflation, for example, was reaccelerating. If we look at private sector job growth, that was not doing very well. So again, there were a lot of negative indicators there, things that pointed to economic decline, at least when we talk about, GDP. But that may not be the best definition of a recession anymore. For example, if we look at how the economy did under Joe Biden, GDP did quite fine. It actually did very, very well indeed, because you continuously had government spending and borrowing, which helped increase GDP. And not only did it increase the government purchases component of that equation, but because the government was giving so much to people in the form of government transfers, all of which was just borrowed, that caused private consumer spending to go up, even though the source of that spending wasn't actually private incomes.
EJ and Tony, David, Herbert, really appreciate both of you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Steve.